What is up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh service to debrief an effort to send biblical truth. What better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm Mark Francis in the host seat today, and we have a trio of hosts here for you. Unfortunately, Mark Carey is not available and not around, and he drops sermons like this and then says, okay, leave it up to everybody else.
I think he does it on purpose.
He picks the weeks. He knows what it is, but you have heard him already sitting in that teaching seat.
I'll take the hot seat. It's fine.
Caleb Pearson,
Yep,
how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Awesome. Repping the JMU brand today for those of you that are watching.
Had to do it. Go Dukes.
And then we got Miss Abby Lindenberg.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Glad to have you back.
Thanks.
Are you back to be in full swing work mode now that you're our mom as well?
I would say so, yeah. Gabe
Okay.
spends a lot of time here with me, but yeah.
It's so fun
we're
seeing
working it
Gabe.
out.
Also, happy belated birthday.
Thank
Her birthday
you.
was yesterday.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank
It was her
Wonderful.
only birthday wish was to be on the podcast. She couldn't stop thinking
And
about
to have Caleb sing for you.
Of
it.
course.
No.
Yeah.
That won't happen.
Well, we dove into Mark 1 once again. So we've been tackling that for a couple weeks now. And we were able to get a little further down the path of Mark 1, where it spoke to wilderness and it spoke to a little bit of calling out disciples. But Caleb, I'll turn to you first real quick, and Abby jump in as well.
Yeah.
Caleb, you're on that teaching team, which we've talked a little bit about here on the podcast of how there's a collaborative process here for the book of Mark, where there's 4 of you guys that will be in the teaching pulpit over the course of the series. So you haven't been yet, but you're going to be, right? And then Micah Dirksen also is going to join Mark and Tim. What have you been seeing in these study times leading up to that, and what did you guys really discuss for this passage?
Yeah, I mean, from a teaching team perspective, it's been a fun balance because we're focusing on individual sermons and services, how to package whatever section we have. But at the same time, there's going to be themes throughout. And if you have multiple people teaching, it can be very helpful not just to be on the same page and make sure we're teaching, obviously, the truth and similar things, but that we're reinforcing and preparing for what's to come. And so I could definitely see that stand out. I have some of the notes we reviewed and Mark presented this past weekend. To focus on that idea of the wilderness is unique to Mark's gospel compared to the other 3. And so I think at first glance, you see the section we're going through this week and you think, okay, this is where Jesus calls people. He calls disciples. You could easily talk 40 minutes about discipleship. That isn't really what we did. Instead, Mark is bringing up discipleship, but he's very much painting a picture of Jesus in the wilderness, meeting us where we're at, and how we can understand that. And so it almost became this point where, based on the way the chapter structure, at least this section, the recruiting of people is a little bit of an afterthought, in the sense that it was one of many things that was being established. And so I think that was, I can't speak super duper for Mark, but I think that was the goal of let the text speak for itself, focus on why in the world would Mark immediately, quite literally, use that word, have the account of Jesus in the wilderness with Satan, and then come back and still be dealing with these things as he's recruiting people for this public ministry. That's going to bear fruit that we focused on that to that degree over the next couple weeks.
It's funny you say that you might, at a glance, look at this and say, okay, we're going to focus on the following me component. So the worship team plans services and likes to do things in advance, and we have a little bit of the calendar of what passage are going to be there. And sometimes we'll hear from the pastor who's teaching, sometimes we don't. This is one time where we're like, okay, we're going to focus on the following and the calling components because we think that's where he's going to go.
Sure.
So we fell into that ditch.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate how you guys as a team are collaborating to figure this out of like, there are other things to bring out of a little 2-verse passage that other gospels are giving 10, 12, 13 verses to of the temptation.
Yeah.
So Abby, what did you hear and find?
Yeah.
with that?
Well, I thought the added level of the metaphor of the wilderness was helpful because I think a lot of times we talk about well, Jesus was tempted the same ways we were, so he can relate. But it's adding this wilderness metaphor to our wilderness and how we're going through it together. And I just thought that made it another way to relate to Jesus, another way to prove that he does know us, he knows what we're going through.
And the geographical locations of what Mark put up on the map the prior week of where John the Baptist is in the wilderness, and the nation of Israel has circled the wilderness, and now Jesus is going to the same wilderness. It's our minds can. I mean, we don't even know all these crazy things that God pieces together. That like He's just smiling and be like,
well, and
this is just fun to God.
You run the risk
Put
of
him in the
reading
same spots.
You run the risk of reading the gospel accounts and maybe accidentally believing there's no way all of this is important. Like these places and these whatever. So to wrestle with that question, okay, why did he get baptized there? Why was he here? If everything God's been doing is building to this point, the environment's going to matter. The location's going to matter. Where Jesus is when he's doing what he's doing is going to matter. And so I appreciate that Pastor Mark brought that out. Mark's gospel account of Jesus and Satan is not resolved. There is no Jesus used scripture and defeated Satan's tactics. Mark doesn't mention the defeat of Satan. He just says that's where he went and he was tempted. And then moving on. And so we're going to learn a lot more about this author, Mark, and why he's choosing to kind of drop pins on certain elements of stories. Clearly, he's going to be painting a very vivid picture throughout the entire gospel. But it really does start with, that's how his ministry started, was in the wilderness.
Right. And doesn't it just speak to God's character that nothing is haphazard, nothing is disjointed, it's all intentional, and we can glean something from that.
Sure.
To know about our own lives that there's nothing that's out of place. There's nothing that God hasn't allowed to get filtered through his hands, that he is fully in charge of. And so you can see that in the intentionality of these little details of why every word matters in Scripture, that we can then rest and know, okay, God does have a plan.
Right.
I mean, every little detail. I remember being in a Sunday school class years and years ago at a different church, and a guy was like, I'm going to go out and buy a car this coming week, and we're wrestling with this idea of what is that? Does God care about? He's like, does God really care if I buy a red car or a blue car? And us as a very immature group of people were like, I don't know. How do we wrestle with that? And it just makes you think.
Yeah.
Nothing goes unseen by God. And so for him to put Jesus in the wilderness in this spot is intentional.
Right.
And we can grow in our faith in God because of that.
Yeah.
I've also been thinking about the fact that Mark's book is action based. Like we've talked about this in the past. It's all action. And it's kind of like what is the point behind that? Why did God have this account recorded of all the actions and not focused on the teaching? Because the teaching is important too. And so I don't know. I'm kind of wrestling with that. If you guys have thoughts, happy to hear.
Well, that's a great question. You should wait till next week.
Okay.
because we're going to see Jesus teaching, and Mark spends precisely 0 time telling us what he was actually teaching. So that question is actually going to come to a head where we will literally get a Jesus encounter where he was teaching, and the content isn't even stated so much as what happens around it. And so it's going to be fun to continue to wrestle with that.
How about being in a wilderness, in a desert with wild beasts is the other text, and how Mark was able to go down a bunny trail, pun intended there, to explain what, and even there's significance in that of the lions and tigers and bears. Oh my!
Right.
It was kind of a fun thing that he kept coming back to realize. We all have those wild beasts, but Jesus literally. I mean, can you imagine every single night being in a desert where it's hot and cold, and you got lions and who knows what else, snakes. I hate snakes. All around you. How you can sleep at night for 40 straight days? That's intense. And then being tempted all at the same time.
Right.
It's just mind-blowing of the things that Jesus lived through. Never mind the crucifixion and the cross. And
you can picture that, right? The hyperbole, the crazy state of affairs in the desert, in the wilderness with the enemy. But then you also picture Jesus in Capernaum with people who sin and might not even wrestle with what he's actually saying or who he actually is. There's many definitions and dimensions to the idea of wilderness. And so that's, if we think Mark's use of the word wilderness is going to be exclusive to the desert with the enemy, we're going to see that that's wrong.
Right.
This is Jesus coming into our wilderness, into our world.
Yep.
Right, where we're going to learn a lot. Like the theological implications of all this is good. You just alluded to that. How can we believe, right, that children's song, he's got the whole world in his hands, but yet so often we're like, things are out of control in our life. But both can be true at the same time, by the way. In your life, your perspective, things are out of control. certainly out of your control. But to remember who God is and see how intimately involved he is, this, again, what is the one thing that separates Christianity from every other religion other than the fact that it's true? It's that this is God coming to us. It's not us trying to get to him. And so Mark's going to very vividly paint that picture to where the other three Gospels are they're the curators of the museum a little bit, but he's the painter. Like what he is going to do with the Gospel account in Mark should really hopefully take our understanding of the Gospels from black and white to color, because the way he writes and the speed at which he does will do that. One thing I wanted to point out, you just described worship team falling into a ditch, not in a bad way, but we wanted to focus on the follow me, and then the sermon didn't.
Right.
I personally see that as a huge strength. Here's a word-for-word note Mark has in his notes. I'm not sure how much time I'll have to develop this idea of 5 qualities of an effective follower of Jesus based on that phrase, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. It shows willingness, obedience, loyalty, vision, and humility. You study passages like this. When we come together as our teaching team, it's like there's so much in here. What am I going to communicate? What am I not going to communicate? I bring that up now to say it's actually awesome that the worship team chose to focus on that and remind us that the angels were just sent to minister to him, right? Now he's going to have men to minister with him. And so there is this community aspect to what Christ is doing, and that's where the application, I think, really starts to.
And just as Jesus called disciples, we've all been called, and so there's this component of being sent that you hear Scott Santmeyer say a lot, and so each and every weekend when we do gather, we have gathered and then we scatter. There's this rhythm, there's this cycle of gathering and scattering, and circling the wagons to be reminded of who God is and what he's done for us, to then being sent out. And in that sending, we are called to then proclaim, and we've been called for that purpose as well. So to look at the disciples and how Jesus is calling them intentionally, we've all been called intentionally. And to do what? To follow him, but then also to serve him and to proclaim him and to be a reflection of him. You can go all those lists of the things that we're called to do. On any given week, we can look at those corporate gatherings that we have of that kind of calling and that being sent out. And so I'm really going deeper than what the worship team might have been thinking through in the planning. But if you look at the songs and even hear the call of the kingdom, building my life, to even the closing song, Awesome is Lord Most High, has a lyric, where you sent us, God, we will go. And so you're the answer we want the world to know. So I get excited about how you can see connections with that. And obviously that's the title of the entire series, follow me. And so when you do merge and weave in a passage like that yes is wilderness and the potential of anxiety and fear and doubt and my wild beasts around me, we can still rest and have confidence that we're called to follow him in that way.
I think once we realize discipleship is an attitude, it's a lifestyle, it's certainly going to be much more than a passage. It is interesting that now we finally get that idea of following clearly listed in the Gospel of Mark, but that we named the whole series that. And so that's going to, again, continue to reaffirm itself. Sometimes it can be harder to preach through the introduction to some of these books because you're laying the foundation that's going to increase and help interpret everything that comes after it. And so that's really, if it has ever, and I don't think it's felt this way to me, but if it has felt slow or it's felt like, man, when are we going to, all of this is going to start to make way more sense the more we learn about this author and the more we look at our own lives and say, okay, the Gospels are here for more than just evangelism and converting new believers. They are here for me to understand and study the life of Jesus and realize that everything he said and did and everywhere he went was with such intentionality, and it's profitable and it pertains to a life in godliness. That's what I keep coming back to, is it's obviously profitable, but it pertains to the life we're living now. And so it's been cool to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, and it's an example too for like our Christian life and what we can expect. Like Jesus suffered, obviously. Wilderness was not easy, so we can expect to suffer too. And in a way that's comforting to know. I don't know. I think I'd rather know that things are going to be hard than be surprised by that.
Right.
So it's just encouraging, whether it's positive.
And that's a huge principle of Bible study when you study the Gospels. It does not affirm or promote the prosperity gospel. It promotes the opposite, and you will find trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. The focus is on Christ. The guarantee is you will have trouble, and the guarantee is I am handling it and have handled it. And so that's where our strength is.
When you don't have that foundation, you can easily fall away. I've got people that I know that I'm friends with that, they're believers, and they've just kind of drifted off. And they're anxious about planes falling out of the sky.
Right.
They're anxious about what's going to happen with the government workers. They're anxious about, their health. I mean, it's just so many things. And if you don't have that foundation,
and here's one thing I'll say, like a huge evidence of that is what we're putting in these the testimonies that are at the beginning of the sermon. Practical, real life examples of life, hard struggles, difficulty. But here's that doesn't just vividly describe, okay, here is somebody we know and love that's part of our congregation that's going through this. That is great. I love this opportunity to be a part of this service and for people to experience it, because you explicitly learn something, but you implicitly learn something as well. For every one of those videos we have, imagine how many videos we don't have. Mm-hmm. Because people have hit struggle, trial, trouble, you name it, and they haven't understood and experientially had this stuff in their life and know that this is who God is despite whatever's happening to you. That is such a powerful tool that really helps us. We love that it fits right in the service, and before we're even exegeting a passage, there's this raw example of a story, a person, a name, and a face that is pointing to Jesus. The text is going to do the same exact thing. The author, Mark, he's going to get 35 minutes. Most of our people are getting 3 minutes, but it's the same. The point is the same. And all it does is hopefully allows us to leave with a greater picture of, the woes of life are great, but God is greater. And now there's this personal example of that.
And here's the beauty of those stories. Yes, so far we've been hearing some of just the struggles of life, but as we progress in this series, there's going to be stories of joy, stories of celebration, stories of just the exciting parts of life that doesn't have to be the dark and deep parts of it, but yet we can still follow him through those times as well.
Right.
And so don't think, oh, wow, I don't have stories to share because I'm not going through what they're going through. Each and every one of us have stories every single day of how we're called to follow Jesus, and what does that look like each and every day.
And even if we don't have those stories yet, what if one day we will? There's two kinds of spiritual growth. Both are good, by the way. Proactive spiritual growth and reactive spiritual growth. Yes, it can help to go through something, learn a crazy ton of information or experience about the Lord, and then grow in it. Absolutely. But I put myself in the shoes of our youth that maybe go to a Sunday school class 1 hour and then attend with their families to be part of the corporate worship. A 15-year-old watching that testimonial, watching any of them, they might not have a lot in common personally with whatever story is being shared, but 10 years from now they might. I see proactive spiritual growth being a thing that can happen to prepare and deploy disciples who are dependent on the Lord. That is a proactive goal, I think. And so that's where, and that's hard. I get it. You're tired on a Sunday morning. You're like, here we go. But to orient our minds and heart for that of, okay, Lord, what can I learn that can benefit me now? That's what we always ask. But also have the foresight to say, Lord, what might you be giving me here that's going to come in handy and down the road, 3 months, 3 years, who knows? That is where we really start to say, okay, Lord, my life is yours. Grow me, please. And that's what I think the gospel seek to do.
We could continue to keep talking for more on this, because I'm looking at the passage, rereading it as we're talking here, and there's so many things that Mark brought out or that he didn't even bring out. And so I just challenge each person watching and listening to carry on the conversations. This is just an example of what you could be talking about amongst yourselves, whether it be community groups or having lunch or breakfast with somebody, even with your own family. What did you glean out of the sermon, and what questions do you have? Because that's why we're doing this podcast, so you can maybe be encouraged a little bit more in the passage, but also model what conversations can look like. So thank you guys for being here,
because
this is good stuff. So I will turn to myself here for some few other announcements. Yeah.
Yeah, we got
Does that
stuff
make
going on.
sense? So
Yep.
there are things coming up. So we had baptism last weekend. It was great to celebrate what is happening there. We also have a couple other events coming up on Sundays. So in a couple of weeks on March 9th, there is the family lunch that we will be asking for all families and parents with kids aged 6th grade and below. Come on out and have a lunch together. It's something that the Fellowship Kids Ministry has been doing for the last couple of years, just so you can glean a little bit more information of what's happening in the ministry, but more importantly, you can build fellowship and relationships with other parents who are going through similar things with you, and just have lunch together. So bring your kids for that. You can please register online because it's just helpful for us to know how many people will be there. So just let us know that you're coming. The week after that, on Sunday, March 16th, is the Fellowship Family Meeting, not to be confused with the family lunch. So this is for the idea that we're calling our entire church, our church family. And you want to come out for that, 6 o'clock, of looking just past, present, future, God's faithfulness through our church staff and through the transitions that continue to occur, visible and even behind the scenes at our staff. So we'll be able to find some opportunities to celebrate certain staff members and see what God's doing in their life throughout transitions. So that's what's coming up in the next couple weeks. More on our website, fbcva.org. And let us know. Also, if you want to share your story, I just want to highlight that. We would love to hear from you, not just here on this podcast, but it could potentially be a corporate gathering testimony if you feel like God's working in your life, or we can have the Fellowship Family podcast where we love to share testimonies and stories as well, because again, it's not glorifying you, it's glorifying God and encouraging other people through your story. So we want to hear from you. Abby, Caleb, once again, thanks for being here.
Thank you, brother.
And the fact of the matter, guys, is that sermons are not meant just to take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love and God bless.